Wow, guys, Drake's entire lawsuit got dismissed. I mean, the L that Drake took, the pain that he's likely feeling right now. I mean, the court came back and said the full dismissal, and it wasn't just defamation. That's the important piece here. The defamation claims were the biggest piece, but they weren't the only piece. And so the fact that there was a full dismissal, initially when I heard this, I'm talking to my lawyers at our firm, and they're like, is this right? This can't be right. Well, we're going to go through it because here's the context. In the context of just general defamation claims, opinions are protected. That's why defamation claims are real hard. I'm a litigation attorney, so I can tell you when people say mean things about you on the internet, oftentimes you're not going to be successful in a defamation claim because if it is someone's opinion, it is likely protected by the First Amendment, and in this case, New York law. But statements of fact, that's where this thing hinges on. If it's a statement of fact that then causes harm, that wasn't true, then you may qualify for defamation. So, the context of this lawsuit is that it was a lawsuit filed by Drake regarding the Not Like Us song and the words that Kendrick Lamar put into the song, but it wasn't against Kendrick Lamar. This was a lawsuit against not only Universal, Kendrick Lamar's label, but also Drake's label, which is where I'm like, the reality for Drake right now has to be wild. I mean, you just lost a massive lawsuit in a very public way. So your label just won, the label that still represents you. And I go, what's the reality of that? So, I'm sure Drake has further recordings that he needs to deliver pursuant to his contract with Universal. He needs to release stuff. So what's that going to be like as far as the working relationship with Universal? And I go, well, sometimes with, these companies, they're so big, right? So you're fighting the good fight and whatever, and you're the people closest to you aren't the same as the ones that you're dealing with on the other side with the lawyers and this and that. So I don't know, maybe it's big enough so it's not going to be awkward at work. That's the point I'm getting to. But I'm like, what if he decides to put out music where he's dissing his label? He probably has some thoughts about all of this. Well, are they going to suppress his music now? Are they going to shelve him? Right? So just meaning they don't have an obligation to put anything out. And then my big question is I go, well, we're like, 10 months? This lawsuit was filed back in January. Now, the whole thing started before then, okay? But the actual lawsuit started then. And so that's when we saw probably the biggest increase, right? For lawyers' fees. So knowing that Universal's lawyers' fees are in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, very likely, are they going to try to recoup those somehow? Because they get to make up the pricing for how they bill things when they do music videos and schedule studio time. So look, what I want to do today, without getting too much in the weeds, I just think about this stuff practically, right? So if I was, representing either side, what is the reality for them waking up today? So the overview of the case, of course, was that, in Universal's attempt to get this thing dismissed and to say, court, we don't think that Drake can prove any of this. There are problems with the actual lawsuit. And in fact, this is a hyperbolic rap battle. And because it is a rap battle, we're going to ask for a blanket kind of coverage over the whole thing. All the words, all the sentences, all the stuff that Drake is taking an issue with, don't even analyze it. You don't even need to look at the actual language because these were diss tracks. And when we looked at this, we go, well, that's quite the ask, because typically at the initial stage, the court can look at these things, but typically it's going to like deep dive, right? Could there possibly ever, in the existence of music, there be a song where there was something that was defamatory, that actually caused harm to someone, that was false? Well, yeah, of course. And so we wondered what the court was going to do with this. And then what happened is that they were duking it out with the discovery stuff, because while the motion to dismiss was pending, and it just sat and it sat and it sat, the court wasn't doing anything. So while it was sitting, they kept going with discovery, which is, I want contracts. I want you to answer these questions and send, these responses to our inquiries. And so they had a lot of fighting. And if you guys remember, we were talking about how Drake was trying to get text messages and different things from the CEO of Universal, and specifically like off of his phone. You know what I'm saying? And being like, I think maybe there's conversations happening with Kendrick, and you guys are plotting and doing all these things, because a part of the lawsuit, if you remember, outside of defamation, was that you juiced the numbers, Universal, right? So Not Like Us was allegedly not as popular as we all believe it to be. If we pop onto Spotify and see those numbers, they aren't all legit. And so in juicing the numbers, you basically caused harm to me, Drake. Now, when we looked at that, we go, okay, because what he did is he brought this claim being like, this has caused like consumer harm. And so our kind of big question mark on this was, you're asserting consumer harm, but how does that work? And I'll explain why when we get to it. So, understanding there was the, business infringement, the consumer harm, there was the defamation, and there were a couple other things. The court came back and dismissed absolutely everything. So, they're in the middle of like all this discovery back and forth. And in fact, it came out that Drake had dropped about $75,000 because just one of the key witnesses that he wanted to get some stuff from, right? You can depose people, you can get documents and all this kind of things from. But one of the key witnesses that allegedly would be talking about all this stream boosting that was done on the song, right? He couldn't get a hold of him. So he had to pay like a private investigator $75,000. And then on the last time we reported on this, which was about a month ago, when we reported this on, we're like, everyone's missed this. We saw that in the court's docket, the court had received this thing called an amicus brief. And so all these experts, these are like academic experts from the University of California, they got together, they wrote up this thing that they sent to the court. Okay, they're not like a part of the case, but you can do this, where they go, we think that there's something that you really, really need to know. And so we're like, all right, let's take a look at this. So they go in, they're like, we're the experts when it comes to rap battle and, generally like music culture and like all this stuff. And so they went through and explained to the court a bunch of stuff. And they're like, you cannot take rap lyrics seriously for all these reasons. So they went through, and if you guys remember, they were like talking about fictionalized characters. And they pointed out like Eminem, Young Thug, 50 Cent. And they're like, these guys, put on these exaggerated street personas because it sells better. And they used 50 Cent in one of the instances and quoted him. And they're like, he's like, he doesn't do drugs, he doesn't drink, he doesn't whatever. He's like, but I talked about that because I saw that other people talked about that stuff in their lyrics and the music did better. But they really focus and they're like, the decision here, court, is so huge that if you decide to basically like shut, or I should say on the reverse, if you allow Drake, right, to go after his label to say you should be liable for the words of someone else in the context of a rap battle and all this stuff, that would be detrimental to the music industry. That would have a chilling effect, right? That would stop people from engaging in this artistic expression. And then also, besides the fact of like, now you're going to have distributors policing you, because I was like, well, it's tough because, if ultimately Drake won on this, and remember, we're not over yet, okay? Because just because he lost at this stage, there actually is a next step, and we're going to talk about that. But in any case, what's the reality here? If a music distributor now could be held liable for what? One word? A sentence? Do you see what I'm saying? So it's a very slippery slope. And so this case had a lot of implications. So the court comes out with an order, and the way that it kind of went through this, to me, was amazing. But I wanted to mention that amicus brief because I wonder if that made the day. I wonder how much this group of people who decided to insert themselves into this case, whether it made the day. So you guys can let me know. All right. Let's jump over to the court's order. On April 19th, 2024, Drake released a diss track directed at Kendrick Lamar called Push Ups. In Push Ups, Drake mocks Lamar's height and shoe size, how the F you step in with a size 7 men's on, Pesquite pipe down, and questions Lamar's success. You ain't in no big three. I'm at the top of the mountain, so you tight. Now just to have this talk to your A, I had to hike down. I think that was Pipsqueak. All right. A few days later, Drake released tailor-made freestyle in which he uses artificial intelligence generated voices of deceased rapper Tupac and the rapper Snoop to goad Lamar, right? If you guys remember, Kendrick wasn't being quick enough in the response. And the court kind of breaking this down. One, I'm just like imagining this judge is sitting there like listening to the songs, reading the lyrics, which is what you need to do, right? To the extent that we're going to consider the full context of what happened. So we go on. In the track, Tupac and Snoop Dogg share their disappointment that Lamar had not yet responded to push ups. You seem a little nervous about all the publicity. You got to show the effing owl who's boss on the West. Drake, in his own voice, further taunts Kendrick for failing to come up with a satisfactory response, saying, quote, I know you're in that NY apartment. You struggling right now. I know it. In the notepad, doing lyrical gymnastics, my boy. Okay. All right, so Lamar fired back at Drake in Euphoria, which was released April 30th, 2024. In the track, Lamar claims, quote, I make music that electrify him, you make music that pacify him, and that he would spare Drake this time. That's random acts of kindness. He accuses Drake of fabricating his claims, quote, no, you a master manipulator and habitual liar too, but don't tell no lie about me, and I won't tell truths about you. So, the court's kind of building this up to show that there was a progression because remember, what Drake's lawyers they were asking the court to look at Not Like Us in a vacuum and to say, look at just this one song and specifically look at the fact that he is calling me a Pedialyte. This is the thing that ultimately has resulted in extreme harm. And of course, if you guys remember from the original complaint and then the amended complaint, this thing opened up with people came onto my property and opened gunfire. So it was very dramatic on the drama, on the harm that has allegedly been caused to Drake. Now, back to the diss tracks. Obviously, I think the court's just pointing out here that Kendrick is essentially warning Drake. All right, so he goes on. He insults Drake's fashion sense. I hate the way that you walk, the way that you talk. I hate the way that you dress. Further raps, I believe you don't like women. It's real competition. You might pop A with them, and taunts Drake for being a coward with his responses. I hate the way that you sneak diss. If I catch flight, it's going to be direct. On May 3, 2024, the feud between Drake and Lamar escalated as they lobbed increasingly vicious personal accusations at each other over the course of the day. First, Lamar released 6-6 in LA, in which he calls Drake a terrible person. Lamar accuses Drake of playing dirty with propaganda, raps that if Drake was street smart, then he would have caught on that his entourage is only there to hustle him. Drake's next response arrived later that day in Family Matters. Drake jabs at Lamar's relationship with his partner. Quote, you, the black messiah, whiffing up a mixed queen and hit vanilla cream to help out with your self-esteem. Oh, some Bobby. I'll go with how the court went through this. I want to know what Whitney need. And implies that Lamar physically abused her. And so this was so much part of the conversation as we have been covering this the last year, on just, if you're going to goad Kendrick Lamar, if you're going to throw insults, but then also make accusations, because going back to this, remember, if we can frame this as you are saying statements of fact, and that's kind of what Drake was trying to do. He goes, you are framing this in a way where you are making the general public believe that I'm a Pedialyte. You're making them believe these bad things about me. And a big thing that he did in the amended complaints that they filed is that he focused on, outside of the diss track, back and forth and everyone understanding what this is. He's like, with the Super Bowl halftime performance. I mean, this went to a way wider audience. There were a lot of people who wouldn't know that context. And so that's what they were banking on to have this thing survive and hopefully go all the way. All right, so almost immediately after the release of Family Matters, Lamar unleashed the scathing Meet the Grams, in which he accuses Drake of being a deadbeat father and of hiding the existence of other children. Quote, "You lied about your son. You lied about your daughter, huh? You lied about them other kids that's out there hoping that you come." Lamar also alleges that Drake has gambling problems, drinking problems, pill popping, spending days, bad boy. All right, all right. So they're just going back and forth. The next day, May 4th, Lamar releases Not Like Us. Not Like Us explicitly names Drake and his associates as Pedialytes. Specifically, the track contains the following lyrics: "Say, Drake, I hear you like 'em young. You better not ever go to cell block 1. To any B that talk to him and they in love, just make sure you hide your little sister from him. They tell me Chubbs, the only one that get your hand-me-downs and party at the party, playing with his nose now." And it goes on, of course, ending on A minor. All right. So they really tried to hyper focus on the A minor, and in the amended complaint, they went through and scrubbed the internet. They scrubbed through YouTube comments, they scrubbed through Instagram comments. And so what they were trying to do was to show that the general public believed this. Okay. And in the amended complaint, they also were focusing on the imagery, right? The picture, the cover art. They were focusing on the music video. But then on May 5th, Drake responded, "The Heart Part 6, directly denying Lamar's allegations of being a Pedialyte. Quote, "I never been with no one underage, but now I understand why the angle that you really mess with. Just for clarity, I feel disgusted. I'm too respected. If I was effing young girls, I promise I'd have been arrested. I'm way too famous for this," and just suggested. All right, so he goes on to essentially defend himself. Now, where the court basically kind of goes through to be like, procedural history here, real important. I'm not going to consider this in the vacuum of just the Not Like Us song, because that wouldn't make sense. And by allowing someone to kind of trot into court and to be like, despite my participation in this, despite that you're saying the public at large understood this to be a certain way, you don't get to do that, because the public at large would have been observing this, right, from a diss track standpoint. All right, so besides the discussion, let's go in and see how the court broke this down. Fact versus opinion. Under the First Amendment, there's no such thing as a false idea. Only assertions of fact are capable of being proven false. So the court must distinguish between what is a statement of fact, which may be defamatory, and expressions of opinion, which are not defamatory and have full protection of the New York Constitution. In other words, if you are saying, this is my belief, this is my opinion, versus if you are framing something as a statement of fact, which again, the idea of the Pedialyte just being that there was some, or what they allege, right? What Drake's team alleged was that maybe Kendrick had some insider information that no one else did. And so by saying it this way, by doing it this way, he was presenting it as a fact. And that's where this is going to make the biggest difference. All right, so whether a challenge statement is fact or opinion is a legal question. Because this is a question of law, the courts routinely resolve this question at the motion to dismiss stage. So just meaning the court can make this decision here, even though we are still at the baby stages of this case. So when distinguishing between facts and opinions, there's three factors. One, whether the specific language at issue has a precise meaning that is readily understood. Two, whether the statements are capable of being proven true or false. And three, whether either the full context of the communication in which the statement appears or the broad social context surrounding the circumstances are such that the reader or listener would read and hear it as an opinion, not a fact. All right. So the court starts kind of analyzing this and saying, all right, if you go and you read something, let's say on Twitter, okay, Jane has posted something on Twitter. Are you going to take her tweet, or I guess in this case, because the court said tweets, so X, are you going to take her publication as her opinion, or is it a statement of fact? Versus if you frame this up and it's like Forbes magazine has put out an article and it is saying something about, let's say, Starbucks. If you go to Starbucks on 5th and, whatever, you're going to get poisoned. The context of who is saying it, how are they saying it, makes a big difference according to the court. So plaintiff, Drake, the suit focuses on a single factual message conveyed by the song Not Like Us, the false allegation that Drake is a Pedialyte. All right, so the form. To start, the court considers the form in which the allegedly defamatory statements appear, as that is a useful gauge for determining, right, what would a reasonable reader treat it to be? Is it an opinion or is it a fact? All right, so let's go down. The court goes through the example with the tweets. The form for a musical recording in a popular diss track with an accompanying video, album art. Diss tracks are much more akin to forums like YouTube and X, which encourage a freewheeling, anything goes writing style than, let's say, compared to journalistic reporting. The average listener is not under the impression that a diss track is the product of a thoughtful or disinterested investigation, conveying to the public fact-checked, verifiable content. Okay, so remember I went back to the Amicus brief, and I go, this is what they told the court. Now, of course, Universal's lawyers kind of made these points in their motion to dismiss, but that's why I say I'm just so curious what made the day for the court's understanding, because I got to tell you, when we are litigating these really complicated issues that, you kind of have to be in it to know the nuances sometimes. So if we're litigating not just copyright issues, but actually it's a copyright issue having to do with music. And in music, we have the composition side of things and we have the sound recording. And then now let's say we're adding on a layer of AI. And AI and technology in general is very complicated. So trying to explain that to a judge who can hopefully understand then how to apply it to the facts of the case, this is where things can absolutely fall apart. And why, if you ever have to sue someone, your lawyer will likely give you the speech. We cannot control the outcome. And so it's definitely a gamble. And that's why we just went the implications of this case. If Drake had won, would have been huge. So the court says, all right, factor one is just the form. How is this information being published? And will someone, take it seriously? And for a lot of you YouTube content creators out there, I'll say as well that, oftentimes if you are saying stuff on your channel and you're reviewing this and you're, discussing and commenting on that, oftentimes it's going to be taken as your opinion, but you probably is a good thing for you before you go on your spiel to say the words, in my opinion. All right, number two, the surrounding circumstances. So the court considers the full context of the communication in which the statement appears, including the settings surroundings the communication. Context is key. Defamatory statements advanced during the course of a heated public debate during which an audience could reasonably anticipate to use epithets, fiery rhetoric, or hyperbole are not actionable. So the decision, the court goes on to basically talk about, different instances where, again, the context of what happened, super duper important. In, for example, Barstool Sports Incorporated, the district court found that an audience would not reasonably conclude that statements suggesting that the plaintiff had herpes and had abused his ex-girlfriend constituted assertions of fact when published in a 6-minute diss track music video. The district court observed that statements were delivered in the midst of a public and very acrimonious dispute between the parties that would have been obvious to even the most casual observer. And then the Amicus brief, they were talking about, these diss tracks and, rap battles, they get vicious. They not only get vicious and they get underhanded, But oftentimes, these rappers are threatening to kill each other. And so going through and being like, this is how extreme things get. But it's part of the artistic expression. And because it is part of the artistic expression, it's in a certain form. The context of it is this. This is how you have to look at these statements. All right. So the court, even applies this honestly to political stuff as well. And let's see, it goes the recording was published, as part of a heated public feud in which both participants exchanged progressively caustic, inflammatory insults and accusations. This is precisely the type of context in which an audience may anticipate the use of epithets, fiery rhetoric, or hyperbole rather than factual assertions. So, for example, in Euphoria, Lamar calls Drake a master manipulator and a habitual liar and a scam artist. Drake responds in Family Matters by heavily implying that Lamar is a domestic abuser. He also raps that he heard that one of Lamar's sons may not be biologically his. Quote, "Why you never hold your son and tell him, say cheese. We could have left the kids out of this. Don't blame me. I heard that one of them little kids might be Dave Free." In Meet the Grams, Lamar takes issue with Drake involving his family members in their feud. All right. Quote, "Dear Aubrey, I know you probably thinking I wanted to crash your party, but truthfully, I don't have a hating bone in my body. This supposed to be a good exhibition within the game, but you effed up the moment you called out my family's name. Why you had to stoop so low to discredit some decent people." In that same track, Lamar alleges that Drake uses the weight loss drug Ozempic. Quote, "Don't cut them corners like your daddy did. F what Ozempic did. Don't pay to play." All right, so it goes on. Of particular relevance, in Tailor Made Freestyle, Drake challenged Lamar to make the Pedialyte accusations at issue. Using the artificially generated voice of deceased rapper Tupac, Lamar saying, "Kendrick, we need ya, the West Coast savior, engraving your name in some hip hop history. If you deal with this viciously, you seem a little nervous about all the publicity. F this Canadian light skin. We need a no debated West Coast victory, man. Call him a B for me." All right, so the point is being the court's like, you wanted me to look at the diss tracks. You wanted me to consider what was said. So here we go. So, the court goes on to be like, all right, based on all that, you're asking me to ignore all the songs that came before Not Like Us. Okay. And to look at just Not Like Us in a singular kind of way. And I'm not going to do that. And going on to say there's a number of flaws with this argument. Not Like Us cannot be viewed in isolation, but must be placed in its appropriate factual context. Here, the factual context is the insults and trash talking that took place via these diss tracks in the days and weeks leading up to the publication of Not Like Us. The songs released during this rap battle are in dialogue with one another. They reference prior songs and then respond to insults and accusations made by the rival. Okay, so that was part 2 as far as let's really make sure that we are considering the context here. Now, in the audience piece, because, in the amended complaint, they added in, again, the Super Bowl performance and being like, because the Super Bowl performance, and I believe it was like the most viewed of all time, over like 100 million people checked in to watch, and just being like, there was now, and there was the Grammy playing of it as well, but there were all these different audiences now who didn't have context of the rap battle. And we're like, well, I'm curious, is this the argument that's going to make the day? Because there has to be someone, right? There has to be a group of people who fall into this category of what he is arguing and saying that these people won't have context. They'll take what was said as true because they'll only go and hear Not Like Us because you know what? Not Like Us was so popular. And what the court goes on to say is, well, with Not Like Us and the popularity, well, you can't anticipate that. You can't control the popularity of a song. So essentially asking for the punishment of Universal vis-a-vis Kendrick Lamar's song because of its popularity, because all these things, let's say, may be true. And there may be a group of people that never heard the others, diss tracks, and they don't have the context. Well, in the creation of the music, in the framework of how we have to analyze this through a defamation, purview, can't do it. All right, so additionally, it's not just the recording which gained a cultural ubiquity, but the rap battle itself. In deciding this motion, the court need not blind itself to the public attention generated by this particular rap battle. The court takes judicial notice of the extensive mainstream media reporting that surrounds the release of Not Like Us and the associated feud between Drake and Lamar. Well, and that's a good point too. So the court just kind of says, hey, also, a lot of people probably do know the context of this because everyone is reporting on it at this point. All right, perhaps the most fatal for plaintiff's argument would render protection for artistic expression dependent upon an impermissible retroactive analysis, right? So, after the fact, we'll take a look back and try to piece it together. So the court goes on to be like, look, tone, language, the fact that this, again, was a rap battle, all super important. Not Like Us is replete with profanity, trash talking, threats of violence, figurative and hyperbolic language, all of which are indica of opinion. A reasonable listener would not equate a song that contains lyrics such as "Ain't no law, boy, you ball, you ball boy, fetch Gatorade or something since 2009. I had this bee jumping." All right. So basically, the language matters, the court's trying to say. Plaintiff contends that in determining if the lyrics in Not Like Us express fact or opinion, the court must consider the subjective views of the listener, right? So the person listening to this, how do they understand it? And importantly, do they understand this to be someone's opinion, or is it a statement of fact? And so the court goes, again, because of the context of the language that is being used around this key statement about sexual violence against children and all of that, the court goes, taking that context together and full consideration, the court holds, based upon full consideration, the context in which Not Like Us was published, that a reasonable listener could not have concluded that Not Like Us was conveying objective facts about Drake. All right, and then the court goes on, talk about the image, right? So, the cover art, and, well, does a picture of Drake's home showing that, how much was it? It was like a dozen, Pedialites allegedly live there. Would someone look at that and take it as true and that this thing actually exists? Would someone look at the video, which again had these different things to reinforce the Pedialite accusation? Is someone going to take this as truth, as fact? And the court said no. All right, and then lastly, before we get to the other claims, the court made it known, goes, well, what about in the instance of mixed opinions? So just meaning, although pure opinion cannot constitute actionable defamation, mixed opinion, which is an opinion that implies that it is based upon facts which justify the opinion, but are unknown to those reading or hearing it, is actionable. So mixed opinions hold the implication that the speaker knows certain facts unknown to his audience, which support his opinion and are detrimental to the person about whom he is speaking. So, right, didn't this go to Drake's ultimate claim here? He's like, you're making people think that you got the secret sauce knowledge, right? And you're spilling the tea as part of this. So that's what the court is commenting on. But just as the overall context of Not Like Us forecloses the argument that its lyrics can be read as factual assertions, that same context negates any implication that Lamar's lyrics are based upon undisclosed facts. Plaintiff argument that the lyrics to Not Like Us can be read to suggest Lamar's reliance upon undisclosed facts is unavailing. Plaintiffs first posits that the line Say Drake, I hear you like him young, indicates that Lamar has heard from outside sources evidence confirming that Drake is a Pedialyte. As discussed, infra, however, that ignores that this line is reasonably understood to be a direct response to Drake's challenge to Lamar in the tailor-made freestyle to talk about Drake liking young girls. So, again, the court's just like, I'm not buying it. You're telling me to look at this in the vacuum. I'm looking at this in, well, he said this, you said that. So plaintiff points to the lyrics, rabbit hole is still deep. I can go further, I promise. Plaintiff argues that a reasonable listener would view this lyric as suggesting that Lamar has specific evidence to back up his assertion of Pedialyte. It is not all clear that this is a natural reading of this lyric. Even if this line was susceptible to such an interpretation standing alone, however, no reasonable listener could understand it in this way given the overall context. Okay. Ultimately finding that, the ordinary listener is likely to find this to all be opinion. Now, remember I said there were other claims. So for second-degree harassment, the court goes through this very in-depth analysis about this, but we called this out in the very beginning. We're like, why are they bringing this? This is pursuant to a criminal statute. Let me be clear. When you sue someone for a personal claim, it's a civil lawsuit. You bring civil claims. You don't get to assert criminal things. And so we're like, this is weird. Why are they bringing this? And so they tried to do some, creative lawyering to bring this. And the court said, no can do. This is a criminal thing, so you can't bring this. So that was the reason why the court decided not to do anything on the secondary, or I should say better, to dismiss the second-degree harassment claim, right? So finding there's nothing to distinguish criminal harassment from other provisions of the New York Criminal Code for which there is no implied private right of action. All right, so now let's get to the streaming fraud. I'm so excited on this one. New York General Business Law, Section 349. So the framework of this basically was you have juice to the numbers, universal. You have made it so that the true numbers and the success of this was a lot inflated from what it really was. And our big question was, we go, well, how does that harm Drake? Does it go maybe to his, I was more embarrassed for what happened with the song? I don't know. So this was the court's analysis. All right, so the plaintiff argued that it had satisfied conditions in its amended complaint, and also that stress that Not Like Us was the fastest song to reach 300 million streams on Spotify within just 35 days. Okay, so the plaintiff argues this is a sufficient basis for the court to infer that defendant implemented a technique to manipulate stream totals, among other unprecedented tactics to read unprecedented rocketing up the stream chart. So the court disagrees. And do you remember we were talking about this and we're like, he's making all these allegations about how the label does things and its tactics for promoting, as far as like paying some money to influencers and YouTubers and getting not just, let's say, the fake streams, that's a big part of the allegation, but getting other commentary around to, again, juice the numbers. And we go, it kind of sounds like you're saying that because you have firsthand knowledge. So it sounds like you're calling out your label in its business practices. But again, for what you're saying, if boosting the numbers into something greater, and let's say millions, there were millions and millions of additional botted plays on Spotify, how does that ultimately harm you? All right, so then what Drake did to try to support this claim is he pointed to, tweets, right, and other comments to say this should show proof. And, well, the court said this fails to establish a plausible inference that Universal manipulated listeners into streaming Not Like Us. Plaintiff's allegations, based on what boils down to unreliable online commentary, do not form a sufficient basis such that there is a reasonable expectation that discovery will reveal evidence of illegality. Okay, So in other words, what happens at the stage with the motion to dismiss is that they go, if the plaintiff, if Drake has not shown enough for the court to be like, we think you could possibly win on this. If we let you go past this initial step, if we think you have any kind of chance of being able to show this, we'll let you go. Otherwise, we got to kick you out. And so what the court ultimately came back and said, you don't have enough. You literally are just pointing to the abyss and saying, I think, and you are guessing, and you don't get to guess. And because you're guessing, well, that's why the court decided to dismiss this count as well. The amended complaint is somewhat vague as to who the class of consumers is, what the products of good are, what are the services that they're purchasing. So this goes back to just generally how the lawyers pled this. And I don't know how to say it any other way than that, but they brought a consumer, fraud kind of claim, but they're like, but Drake knew all along, so he wasn't consumed. And so again, you have to bring claims where you say, I was the person that was harmed, therefore I am the one bringing this. So there were some missteps in kind of generally how this was pled. Now, guys, there is so much here as far as what now has happened, because the last, not just year, obviously this whole situation has been ongoing, far beyond, I think more like 2 years, far beyond this lawsuit. But the fact that this lawsuit has now come to this head, Drake has one of two options. He can appeal, or he can take the loss, he can take the L, and be done with this. And from what his lawyers have said thus far, they are saying they're in fact going to appeal this. And so many people are just kind of commenting about, why? Why does he keep pushing on this? Why does he not just kind of, you lost the rap battle. What's the point of you, let's say, if you truly were so upset about the lyrics, why are you going after the label? Why aren't you going after Kendrick Lamar himself? And so is there something else here where he is trying to maybe strategize a better deal? Maybe he wants to get out of his contract. Maybe he wants to drive Universal crazy, and so they end up letting him out of his contract early. Is there something else going on here as to why he would have strategically decided to bring this against Universal, and then understanding that this has not been looking very good for him? I think that in the context of, again, the rap battle, the back and forth, someone's got to lose. I think that it's fair if you decide to go into this thing and you ultimately, come out the other side of it and you've lost. You still engaged in it. You did a thing, and you'll have your turn again. But to kind of take it now to, a court of law, a lot of people are interpreting this as you're a very sore loser. And then to get to, let's say, a court order saying, no, you lose on absolutely everything. Now he can appeal, and he can try yet again. And, shockingly, from what we have read, that's in fact what he's going to do. So guys, I'm going to leave it there. Leave your thoughts down in the comments, and we'll be sure to follow on whatever happens next. I'm top music attorney, Miss Krystle.